I believed him because he wasn't talking just to be talking. I felt he was also coming straight because there was a big war behind that. A war that they lost. And I think it was a war that destroyed their neighborhood.
So Joe Rogan just revealed something so explosive about Snoop Dogg and Shakur's Vegas tragedy that we're now looking at a story where federal files might be pulled back out of storage, and Snoop's own freedom is suddenly part of the conversation. We are not talking about another round of online gossip or recycled LA street legends. We're talking about a claim that a mainstream podcast giant has seen material suggesting Snoop didn't just know more than he ever admitted about the 1996 drive-by, but that he allegedly hid key information from federal investigators. The kind of information that, if verified, could transform an old cold case into an active legal nightmare. And if that sounds extreme, we need to remember that in 2024 and 2025, real people have already gone to court over this exact tragedy. And one man, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, is literally facing trial in Las Vegas right now as the only person ever criminally charged in Shakur's shooting.
Chaotic. It's hard to actually figure out what's what, but it's becoming clearer. It's becoming clearer and clearer, but...
So when Rogan's name starts getting whispered in the same breath as new evidence, and insiders claim he's sitting on recordings, documents, and witness statements that point towards Snoop, we have to ask why law enforcement veterans and former industry insiders are suddenly treating this as more than clickbait. The alleged core of the claim is simple but devastating. Snoop knew more than he said in the late 90s. He may have warned people that something's gonna happen on the night of September 7th, 1996, and he allegedly kept quiet about details that federal agents and LV detectives were desperate to lock down. If any of that can be backed up by taped conversations or authenticated messages in Rogan's possession, we're not just in rumor territory anymore. We're in obstruction territory, a word every entertainment lawyer dreads when the FBI is involved. The timing is what makes this even more volatile. In late 2023 and through 2024, we watched Nevada prosecutors map out a case against Keefe D., a man who has publicly described his role in the Vegas shooting in interviews and in a 2019 book, even as he pled not guilty in court and secured a June 3, 2024 trial date. At the same time, from a prison cell hundreds of miles away, former death row boss Suge Knight started dropping his own bombs on a podcast called Collect Call, recorded around Halloween and rolled out in several half-hour episodes. Suge made it clear he was not going to testify against Keefe D., but he also made it clear he felt another West Coast legend had a lot of explaining to do, and that legend was Snoop.
He said it was, according to him, he said it was security that accepted money, participated in it, and it was so-called homies.
That's where Rogan's alleged files collide with Suge's public accusations. According to people familiar with the situation, Rogan's supposed evidence adds structure to what used to sound like Suge's scattered grievances. Suge has claimed on air that Snoop warned the Dogg Pound rapper Daz Dillinger not to go to Vegas on the very night of the Tyson fight, allegedly saying that something's gonna happen, a detail Suge presents as more than just superstition. He's questioned why Snoop and Warren G would have had access to live radio-style updates about the shooting from LA if they were not physically at the fight with an official security detail, asking pointedly, by him not having a security detail, what are you doing with a radio? And why would you have a play-by-play? Now imagine those same questions backed by any kind of corroborating communications in Rogan's archive, and we start to understand why people close to federal law enforcement are, allegedly, interested. But to see where this could really go, we have to fast forward to 2025 and walk through what Suge has been saying from behind bars, because his narrative is the backbone of the suspicion that Snoop's fingerprints are all over the mess around Shakur's final days. In these recent interviews and podcast clips, Suge moves beyond vague frustration and suggests Snoop tried to get Keefe D out of jail with a reported $750,000 from an unexplained source, a move that allegedly raised red flags in court documents in January 2025, when bail was denied, partly because the money looked suspicious. According to Suge, the idea that Snoop would step in with that kind of cash for the only man ever charged over Shakur's Vegas shooting demands a level of crimson explanation Snoop has never really given, even as he denies any wrongdoing and continues his high-visibility work in entertainment and business.
You look at it, they committed fraud. They committed bankruptcy fraud. I didn't lose my company by doing anything wrong.
When we match that claim to the public record on Keefe D's case, the stakes become obvious. This is a man prosecutors say was in the car that pulled up next to Suge and Shakur on the Vegas Strip in September 1996. A man whose own nephew, Orlando Anderson, has long been suspected as the trigger man, and who himself was later taken out in an unrelated street tragedy in 1998. Court filings confirmed that Keefe D's attorneys have tried to secure bail ahead of trial, and that prosecutors have argued he should remain locked up until the jury hears the case, with Nevada authorities notably choosing not to pursue the harshest penalty available. Add Suge's assertion that Snoop quietly moved to back Keefe D's freedom with untraceable funds, and suddenly, Rogan's supposed material about Snoop's private conversations and decisions doesn't sound like idle podcast chatter. It starts to look like something that could interest a grand jury. Suge is not stopping at the bail question either. He has also claimed that Snoop never actually went to see Shakur in the hospital after the Vegas shooting, even though Snoop has repeatedly told vivid stories about standing by Shakur's bed, seeing the tubes, fainting, and being comforted by Afeni Shakur. On Logan Paul's Impulsive in 2023, Snoop described arriving in Vegas, going first to Suge's house, hearing a reassuring story about Shakur pulling through, then going to the hospital and collapsing when he realized his friend was barely there, only to be walked to the bathroom by Afeni for a talk about staying strong. Suge's flat contradiction of that entire emotional account, combined with alleged off-mic recordings that Rogan is said to have heard or obtained, raises a brutal question. If Snoop is willing to bend reality on something as personal as a hospital visit, what else in his timeline around 1996 has been massaged for public consumption?
Then as soon as I walked out of there, I went in the bathroom and I threw up. And just laid on the floor for like 30 minutes. His mama came in there and cleaned me up.
To understand motive, we have to rewind to the mid-90s and the evolution of Snoop and Shakur's relationship. In 1993, Snoop became the breakout solo star of Death Row, in prison, with his debut album Doggy Style, essentially turning the label into a West Coast powerhouse under Suge's aggressive leadership. By October 1995, Suge famously posted roughly $1.4 million in bond to pull Shakur out of prison and bring him to death row, a move Snoop himself has taken credit for inspiring, telling Suge that if they signed Shakur, the label would explode. This prediction came true in 1996 with All Eyes on Me, a double album that redefined mainstream hip-hop and cemented Shakur as the new centerpiece of the roster. But that same success planted the seeds of resentment that Suge and some of Shakur's closest associates say never really went away. Former Outlaws member Napoleon has publicly suggested that Snoop, once the undisputed star of Death Row, struggled as Shakur's fame and influence overshadowed him in 1996 and beyond. He's argued that when Snoop now talks in interviews about dimming his own light so Shakur could shine, or about not liking the infamous diss record Hit 'Em Up, he is subtly rewriting history to reclaim a spotlight he feels he lost decades ago. Napoleon frames it as a long-term jealousy, pointing out that more than 25 years after Shakur's tragedy, Snoop is still asked about him in nearly every serious hip-hop interview, which might explain why Snoop's stories seem to shift, and why some comments can come off as quiet digs rather than pure tribute.
Individuals like Snoop, for example, they have a way where they acting like they praising Pac, but they putting them down.
The collapse of Snoop and Shakur's friendship in the days before the Vegas shooting is a crucial part of this picture. Snoop himself has admitted in multiple interviews that a week before Shakur's final trip to Las Vegas, the two were best of friends, but that within 48 hours of the tragedy, Shakur was so upset he may not even have liked Snoop anymore. The spark was a radio interview Snoop did in New York, right after the MTV VMAs, where he spoke warmly about Puff and Biggie, saying he liked them and wanted to make music together, even though both he and Shakur had been targeted in New York street incidents, and Shakur believed Bad Boy had been complicit in the violence. Shakur viewed Snoop's comments as a betrayal at a moment when he was ramping up the East Coast versus West Coast feud most intensely, and that fracture has been dramatized in films like All Eyes on Me and revisited in countless documentaries. Meanwhile, people who were around that era continue to add detail that makes Snoop's role look more complicated than his laid-back uncle persona suggests. Directors like Benny Boom and Alan Hughes have spoken on record about the gang politics behind Death Row, reminding viewers that Snoop came from a Crip background, Shakur aligned with Blood affiliates, and that those loyalties do not vanish just because a record goes platinum. Hughes has even described Snoop as the rock star of the early 90s who allegedly dimmed his light once Shakur arrived, a comment Napoleon interprets as part of a pattern where Snoop is framed as noble while Shakur is subtly diminished. Put that in the context of Rogan supposedly holding tapes where insiders talk more bluntly about jealousy, security calls, and who knew what on September 7th. And the motive narrative starts to sound less like wild theory and more like a messy human story that investigators might be interested in clarifying.
And he was gang related, so it was like our first meeting was on bad terms because we were still gang affiliated and we were using gang terminology on the introduction.
Then there is the business angle, the part that makes Suge's latest attacks feel like something more than an old man in a cell lashing out. In February 2022, it was announced that Snoop had acquired the Death Row Records brand from MNRK Music Group, reclaiming the label that launched him, with executives publicly praising him as the right person to lead it into its next 30 years. Snoop framed the move as deeply personal, saying it felt meaningful to own the company that had shaped his early career, and quickly moved to release new music and merch under the revived imprint. But Suge, speaking from prison to outlets like The Art of Dialogue and on his own podcast, has repeatedly questioned whether Snoop really owns what he says he owns, demanding to see paperwork and accusing him of destroying Death Row's credibility with weak projects and failed revivals. Suge has gone as far as claiming that when he released the Dogg Pound back in the 90s, the group moved real units, whereas under Snoop's stewardship, newer efforts have flopped. And he paints Snoop and Dr. Dre's recent work as a highly touted album that came and went so fast, the culture barely noticed. That might sound like bitterness, but to people looking at the bigger picture, it introduces a darker possibility that lines up uncomfortably well with Rogan's alleged files and the whispers around the FBI. If Snoop did use an opaque financial structure to buy Death Row's brand in 2022, and if some of the label's archival material could intersect with what really happened around Shakur's last months, then the question practically asks itself, did Snoop fight to control Death Row so he could build a legacy? Or so he could lock down and bury any damaging paper trail tied to that era?
For anything, I am Death Row. Suge Knight is Death Row. So I'm quite sure, before it's said and done, all eyes on me and Makaveli out of pocket, I'm definitely to come back to me.
That is the puzzle Suge keeps hinting at when he questions not just Snoop's business acumen, but his intentions. And that is the puzzle Rogan allegedly edges closer to solving if his leaked files contain unfiltered conversations, behind-the-scenes accounts from former security, or financial breadcrumbs tied to Keefe D and the Vegas case. And as long as federal interest in Shakur's tragedy keeps flickering back to life every time a new witness talks or a sealed document surfaces, the idea that the next move for one of hip-hop's most beloved figures might not be another nostalgic interview, but a sworn appearance under oath, stops sounding like a dramatic line and starts sounding like a very real possibility we could be watching unfold in slow motion. As we follow that money and paper trail, another layer of pressure emerges around Keefe D. Legal analysts point out that he is uniquely positioned. He is the only person formally charged in connection with the Vegas tragedy. He has already written and spoken in detail about his alleged role, and yet he now stands in front of a jury insisting on his innocence. If prosecutors ever offer him a structured cooperation deal, they will not be interested in hearing him repeat stories that are already in his book. They will want new names, new descriptions of who knew what on the record label side, and any mention of money flows or communication with major artists. In that scenario, Snoop becomes a name that Keefe can either shield or expose, and the existence of Rogan's alleged recordings and leaked files could be used to test whether he is telling the full truth.
Now, why was he calling me, reaching out to me?
Meanwhile, the culture itself is reacting in real time. Younger fans who discovered Shakur and Snoop through streaming are now watching older interviews with fresh eyes, replaying Snoop's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction speech from 2017, and noting how often he referred to Shakur as his brother while skimming over the darker final weeks of their relationship. Former Outlaws member Napoleon's past comments about Snoop's jealousy and subtle digs at Shakur have resurfaced in 2025 timelines, with many viewers now framing them as early warning signs of a deeper resentment. When those narratives collide with Suge's voice from prison and Rogan's platform as a mainstream commentator, we get a perfect storm where public opinion starts shifting from legendary love story to complicated alliance with secrets still buried.
We can all have a grown-up discussion, and I don't think we need to cancel a longtime musical artist related to it. It was controversial at the time when they considered pulling it, and I guess this movie can't be shown in some countries. But honestly, really innocuous content.
All of this leaves Snoop in an almost impossible position. If he speaks too openly, he risks contradicting past statements, validating Suge's accusations, or stepping into territory his lawyers would rather he avoid while federal interest is warming up. If he stays silent, every new leak, every Rogan segment, every Suge phone call fills the vacuum with a version of the story he does not control. That trapped energy is exactly what we see in those cryptic posts about loyalty, integrity, and never turning on the people who held you down when the world was against you. Lines that may read like generic wisdom to casual fans, but sound a lot more pointed when read alongside court calendars and podcast transcripts. So we end up with a board full of moving pieces. The FBI quietly revisiting old links between LA gangs, record label decisions, and that September 1996 strip ambush. Federal and state prosecutors managing a high-profile defendant in Keefe D, whose knowledge is both dangerous and valuable. Suge Knight, serving his own long sentence, using a prison podcast to settle scores and, possibly, to reshape his legacy by dragging others into the mud. In the middle of all that, Joe Rogan sits with alleged recordings and files that, if ever authenticated or subpoenaed, could either blow massive holes in Snoop's public narrative or, in theory, expose exaggerations in Suge's story that have gone unchecked for too long. And Snoop himself moves from arena stages to meeting rooms with lawyers, from nostalgic interviews to carefully worded statements, as the circle around his name tightens one development at a time. Because if we strip away the celebrity gloss, what are we left with? An unsolved Vegas tragedy that has haunted music for almost 30 years, a label whose vaults may contain more than just unreleased tracks, and a small set of men who were at the center of it all, and are now being forced, slowly, to pick between loyalty and self-preservation. The FBI has the files, Keefe has the leverage, Rogan has the tapes, and Snoop, for the first time in a long time, seems to be running out of room to maneuver. The truth about Shakur's final night has been kept in the shadows for decades, and if those sealed documents and hidden recordings finally see daylight, the only real question is this: how far will Snoop go to keep that darkness from swallowing his entire legacy? Stay sharp, because the next headline in this story could change everything, and we will be right here when it drops.